previous video, we went over some basics of a callback and how a callback works. In a lecture that you'll be either watching today or you will watch tomorrow, this is something that we will be seeing in that lecture. This is very similar to what he has set up for you. And we're utilizing some routes in our server. And I just kind of want to show how a callback looks like in your server. Using Express is what we're using here. And this might look like a lot of code. You know, if you're not used to seeing something like this may be very daunting up front. So first I want to let you know there are some pieces that we understand here, right? And I would recommend that if you feel overwhelmed, break it down first. So just really briefly, I'm going to break down some things. First, we see that we're declaring with the let keyword a variable. Now, you all understand exactly what this is doing. This is just declaring a variable, right? And then we're setting it equal to something that we may not be familiar with. It's requiring this file. Now, what does that do exactly? Well, now pi would be equal to wherever this file path is. And you'll notice that I'm highlighting it. This is exactly where it is on my computer. I actually have that file pulled up off onto the right here. And you'll notice that pi5 would be equal, and I'm just going to tell you that the module.exports is allowing it to be displaying everything inside this object inside of pi5 or pi control 5. And so this object, pi control 5, is now has one property on it called get pi5. So if I use dot notation, which you see down here, pi control 5 dot get pi5, then I would be grabbing whatever is behind this property. This is just called dot notation. Sorry, I forgot it for a second there. So dot notation is digging into an object, something that you should be familiar with. We're just digging into an object. This pi control 5 is this entire object property. We're using a dot notation to dig into whatever is behind this property, which is a function. Awesome. And we're not going over what the heck this function is doing. We're just talking about callbacks. And so let's go ahead and figure out what's happening here on 73. We have something called router. You'll notice when I click this, it's highlighted a bunch of areas where router is used. It is going to be at the top. We are declaring it equal to express.router. Don't worry about that right now. We're not going to worry about that at all. So router has on it, it's an object, you can tell because we're using a dot to dig into it, and we're running a function called get. Now, where does this function begin and where does it end? How many parameters does this function have? These are questions that I would ask if I'm first looking at someone's code. And it's nice that Visual Studio Code, I have this extension. I can click here and find out where it ends. It looks like it's ending right here on 96. And so we know, okay, so this whole area is free game. How many parameters are there? Well, it looks like we have one here. We know parameters are separated by commas. So get has one parameter, which is a string. Kind of looks like a URL a little bit. And then we have another function here. Let's see where this ends. And it looks like it's going all the way down to 96. So there's only two parameters in our get function. It's a string and a function here. It looks like our function is going to take in three things here. We have rec, res, and next. And it looks like rec is being used here and here and here. And we have res, which is being used here and here. And we have next, which is being used here at the bottom. Looks like next is a function. And so that is an example of a callback, right? So next is being invoked here, and so we know that next would need to be a function. All right, so let's go ahead and see what's happening in get pi5. Now, let's go ahead and look at this function here in get pi5. It looks like we have three parameters. We have ID, resolve, and reject. Now, if you recall back to that callback video, the just basics that we went over, just want to remind you that the way that we figure out if resolve, reject, or ID is a callback is by checking to see if any of these are invoked. We'll check ID first. Looks like it highlights here and here. Now these kind of look like they're either going to be a string or a number. And so I believe, or yeah, maybe a Boolean, I don't know, but it's going to be one of these, right? It's going to be one of those values. It's not being invoked, so it's not a function. If we check resolve, that is a function. It's going to be passed in, pi is going to be passed into it, it looks like. If we check reject, that's also going to be a function. So if we invoke get pi5, we need to pass it some value, not a function and a function, in order for get pi5 to not break. And then if we go back here, it looks like we're invoking get pi5 here, right? So we see the invocation here. And I highlighted this, and it looks like this function ends here. So everything in here should be our function. So let's check out, see if we did it. We have ID, which should be whatever this is, and it looks like it's a string. So we're doing just fine. This is a string, it's not a function. And then we have a function here as our second parameter. I'm going to find out where this ends. Okay, so it looks like it ends right down here, which would be resolve. And then we have reject, which is equal to this last function here. And let's just make sure. Yep, there it is. So we have, again, a callback, both being passed in here when we invoke it. And there we go. That's an example of how to see callbacks in the server. We're not going over exactly what's happening here, but we're just defining what a callback looks like here in the server. I hope that's helpful, and I'll talk to you in the queue.